This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
UN warns 2021 shaping up to be a humanitarian catastrophe. Trump orders departure of majority of 700 U.S. troops in Somalia. Ghana's presidential candidates commit to uphold peace ahead of Monday polls. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. In business news, Egypt Economic Summit reviews government's performance during pandemic. And in your sport, late Senegal World Cup hero Papa Diop awarded highest honor by President Macky Sall. We start off in Geneva at the United Nations General Assembly, where world leaders on Friday projected a difficult 2021. They warned that it could be the worst humanitarian year in 75 years since the UN began. They attribute the woes to the coronavirus pandemic that has increased the number of those in need of humanitarian help by 40%. CGTN's Wanja Mungai has the details.
At the special meeting on COVID-19, the top UN officials in Geneva have predicted a tough 2021. They foresee it as the worst humanitarian crisis year in the history of the UN, blaming the looming crisis on the coronavirus pandemic. They say it has put strain on world economies that have been taking measures to contain the virus. The pandemic, they say, has triggered a 40% increase on the number of people needing humanitarian assistance, especially food.
We're not going to be able to fund everything next year. So we have to prioritize, as I say, the icebergs in front of the Titanic. We've really got to give priority to famine destabilization and migration, and issues like Filippo I know will touch upon. If we're strategic and put the funds to these particular icebergs before us, I believe that we can get through 2021 while we work with the vaccines and rebuild the economies so that we can have a better world and achieve zero hunger by 2030.
The World Health Organization is also appealing for financial aid to fund its vaccine kitty. The WHO chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says his team needs $4.3 billion for the cause.
We simply cannot accept a world in which the poor and marginalized are trampled by the rich and powerful in the stampede for vaccines. This is a global crisis, and the solutions must be shared equitably as global public goods, not as private commodities that widen inequalities and become yet another reason some people are left behind.
The conversation takes place days after the United Kingdom approved a vaccine, Pfizer-BioNTech. The UK becomes the first country to approve the vaccine. So far, the UN estimates above 65 million coronavirus infections and 1.5 million deaths globally. Wanja Mungai, CGTN.
The coronavirus pandemic is reported to have claimed more than 1.5 million lives. As many countries grapple with concerns of a second wave of infections, COVID-19 vaccines continue to offer hope. The UK became the first Western country to authorize a vaccine. It's set to start an immunization drive by next week. Getting hold of future COVID-19 vaccines remains a challenge for Africa. However, the Africa CDC says it aims to have 60% of Africans vaccinated against COVID-19 within the next 2 to 3 years. Earlier, we spoke with Dr. John Gawasong, the director for the Africa CDC. He touched on the challenges the continent is facing.
The question of delivery of the vaccine becomes another issue, where we as a continent now have to face some realities there. And there are two issues that we have to look at. The first is how do we procure these vaccines? How do we buy these vaccines? And as you know, we have developed a strategy for the continent, which we call the whole of Africa strategy to access vaccines in a timely, fair and equitable manner. And that strategy was endorsed by the Bureau of the Head of States on August 20th. So it's important that we explain this with clarity so that the entire continent understands that we are working night and day to ensure that Africa is not left behind. Then the second part of that is that we have to begin to look at delivery systems of the vaccines. If you recall, the Pfizer vaccine that has been approved in the United States, the UK, require an extensive cold chain of about minus 70 degrees Celsius. The way you understand this is that the ice cream that you and I eat is usually stored at minus 20, so it's as hard as rock. But we require something that is 3 times colder than that in order to store the vaccine, transport it across the continent. And if you know the climatic conditions on the continent, I mean the high temperatures of at times 40 degrees Celsius, that begins to tell you the challenges that we may have with this vaccine. However, what we at Africa CDC is doing is that we're providing a roadmap on how to deliver these vaccines. We're working very closely with the World Health Organizations and other partners like the UNICEF to provide a roadmap on how to deliver these vaccines given the conditions that they are.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has called for united efforts to help African countries deal with the pandemic. He was speaking during a video conference held by the United Nations Security Council and the African Union. CGTN's Yu Yang has more.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said that China believes the coronavirus vaccine should be a global public good and should be accessible and affordable for African countries.
We need to leverage the UN and the WHO's coordinating role in mobilizing global resources to support the African Union's Africa Joint Continental Strategy for COVID-19 outbreak and broaden Africa's access to medical supplies, medicines, therapeutics, technologies, and capital.
China also called for efforts to achieve the African Union's goal of silencing the guns, bring an end to conflict and bring peace and stability to the continent.
70% of the Security Council agenda items are about Africa. Without stability in Africa, world peace would remain elusive.
UN Secretary General and the chair of the African Union Commission also took part in the meeting. The Chinese Foreign Minister also urged work on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to help bring broad prosperity to African people. That include working closely in the areas such as education, health and agriculture. Yu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
A leading Chinese expert says the country will approve 600 million doses of a COVID-19 vaccine by the end of 2020. Wang Jingji is the deputy head of the Specialist Group for National Vaccine Research and Development. He made the comments at a pharmaceutical conference in Wuhan on Friday. Wang says big news will be announced sometime over the next 1 to 2 weeks. A total of 6 Chinese-developed vaccines have entered phase 3 clinical trials in over 10 countries, including the UAE, Pakistan, Mexico, and Brazil. Chinese firm Sinovac is cooperating with the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo on the CoronaVac vaccine. The company is expected to publish efficacy results by December the 15th. The first doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine have arrived in the UK. It brings the country one step closer to starting its nationwide vaccination program. The government says it's confident of having 800,000 doses of that vaccine by next week. Nicole Johnson has more from London.
What a relief. From Tuesday next week, the British government is expected to start vaccinating care home residents and staff against COVID-19. Thousands of doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine have arrived in the UK from Belgium, transported in trucks.
We're going to see some deployment this side of Christmas, but actually the bulk of the deployment will take place in the new year.
The great challenge with the Pfizer vaccine is long-term storage. It has to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius. It can be stored at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, but only for 5 days. The logistical challenge is immense.
I think the one area I would be worried about is make sure there are enough drivers in place January through to June, particularly then given we rely quite a lot on European drivers to sort of supplement our UK-based workforce. So there might be a bit of a crunch there.
Meanwhile, the top infectious disease expert in the US, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has apologised for appearing to criticise the speed at which the UK has approved the vaccine. On Thursday, he said,
"The UK has decided to do it a little bit differently. They've gone over it very quickly, and I can say, and this is not a criticism, but they've done it in a way that has much less deep than has been done and is being done by the FDA in the United States."
Dr. Fauci has now said he has a great deal of confidence in the British regulatory process. The British government will be hoping the public here does too, as it starts a nationwide rollout of a vaccine produced in record speed and one that could lead the country and the world back to a normal life. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the withdrawal of most of the roughly 700 American troops in Somalia by early 2021. According to an unnamed security official, the country is now shifting its focus on counterterrorism missions in the region to other parts of East Africa. Many of the forces will be redeployed to neighboring Kenya, which hosts a contingent of American Marines. U.S. forces in Somalia and Kenya, including many special operations troops, have been engaging in large-scale training of local troops to conduct raids and capture leaders of al-Shabaab, which is an affiliate of al-Qaeda. The group has between 5,000 and 10,000 fighters and has been conducting attacks in the region, especially in Kenya and Somalia. Well, for more on that story, we're now joined by CGTN's Abdulaziz Billah, who joins us live from Mogadishu. Abdulaziz, thank you so much for joining us. What is the impact of U.S. troops' withdrawal from Somalia's security?
Well, Hannah, if and when the U.S. troops might pull out from Somalia, it will deal a huge blow to the years of a counterinsurgency campaign that the U.S. government and the African Union, as well as the Somali forces, have jointly carried out in Somalia. It is worth noting that the objectives of the U.S. troops in Somalia has not yet been met, according to security experts, because ever since the U.S. forces came, the end game was to decimate al-Shabaab militarily and to weaken them to a sense that the government of Somalia can continue and push out the militants from the remaining parts of the country. But that objective has not yet been met, because militant group, as you've mentioned, their strength is marked around 5,000 and 10,000, and there's still a potent threat to Somalia. They've increased their attacks in recent weeks on African Union bases as well as Somali army bases. Just last week it attacked an army base in Ba'adweyne in the Mudug region of central Somalia, overrunning the base, killing 15 soldiers. So this is one of the reasons that highlights the need for increased assistance to Somali forces in order to combat this insurgency campaign. But at the end of the day, if the U.S. forces pull out, the Somali government has raised its objections to the pullout, saying that it will weaken the government's ability to conduct raids on al-Shabaab targets, because the U.S. forces in Somalia are not just assisting the Somali government, but they're also leading the fight against al-Shabaab, as well as the African Union force AMISOM. Advisors from the U.S. Army as well as combat troops are on the ground leading the fight jointly with DANAP, an elite unit that has been trained by the U.S. Army. So any hasty pullout right now will deal a detrimental blow to the years and sacrifice that has been done by both African troops, Somali forces, as well as the United States. And it's also worth noting that the drone strikes that the U.S. has been conducting in Somalia has helped turn the tide against Africa's dreaded militant groups. So any pullout right now means that the Somali forces and African Union troops are on their own, and they will rely on aerial firepower to carry out attacks in case Al-Shabaab decides to raid these bases.
Abdulaziz, you've given us some specifics about those concerns and what they are regarding this withdrawal, and that they have been even more fierce since this announcement was made. What are some other reasons for worry, especially with the upcoming elections and the situation in Ethiopia?
Well, Somalia is headed to the polls. Within this month of December, senators and members of parliament need to be elected and sworn in, and the elections of the speaker as well as the president will be held in January and February respectively. So security remains the key focus of concern right now in Somalia, and it's part of the campaign pledges that the Somali government as well as the opposition candidates are trying to push that narrative. The opposition is of the view that the government has relaxed its approach to countering insurgency, and it's the reason that we are seeing coordinated attacks happening in Somalia by militant group Al-Shabaab. Just in November, Al-Shabaab was able to carry out 2 suicide attacks, one on a police academy, killing 5 people, and another on a checkpoint next to near the international airport, killing 8 young men who are working, some of them for the government, others who are working as private citizens. So the fact that security remains a major cause of concern right now is why the opposition candidates are trying to pressurize the government to ensure that security remains paramount ahead of elections. And on the other end, Al-Shabaab has not just threatened the elections, it has also threatened those who are going to take part in the process. It has threatened the candidates, the clan elders, the electoral delegates, and it has carried out attacks on and targeted the electoral delegates and killed them. It has also abducted clan elders and threatened them not to take part in the process. So security remains vital ahead of elections, and it's one of the reasons as to why the Somali government says it needs to mobilize its forces, especially in all these constituencies where elections will take place. It's targeting some of the hotspot areas, including the border regions like Gedo, where Somali army troops have been deployed in large numbers so that they can be able to thwart any deadly Al-Shabaab attacks in the Gedo region, and it's going to coordinate the polls in that area. There's also concern that due to insecurity, some of the elections of other regions might take place here in the capital, where the government has much stability and more security personnel here on the ground. So Al-Shabaab remains the biggest challenge right now, and the announcement to pull out troops by the US will likely embolden the group and launch more attacks, especially during the election period right now.
Thank you so much for that, Abdulaziz Billo, joining us live from Mogadishu. Well, the UN and federal government of Ethiopia have signed an agreement that seeks to enable unimpeded, sustained, and secure access for humanitarian personnel and services in Tigray. Most of the areas that UN and other aid agencies will be allowed access are the ones under government control, especially near the border with Amhara and Afar regions. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said the access was strictly based on the need to provide assistance under the principles of humanity, impartiality, independence, and neutrality. He also said an assessment and response mission was already taking place in the affected region as preparations to distribute aid got underway. Well, CGTN's Giram Chala joins us on the phone for more from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Giram, thank you so much for joining us. What is the latest in Ethiopia's Tigray region?
Well, by and large, and especially over the last couple of days, the Tigray regional state remains to be calmer, and the security situation can be called better than what it has been over the last 3 weeks. We know that the National Defense Force control almost all of the Tigray regional state, including the capital city of the region, Mekelle City. At the moment, the special force from the federal police are also operating inside the Mekelle city, especially in order to perhaps to chase and find, apprehend, and bring those people behind this conflict into justice according to government source. So generally speaking, Hannah, the Tigray regional state can be called a place where peace is slowly returning to.
Giram, we're also hearing that the Tigray regional leadership has asked the Prime Minister for a sit-down to discuss ending hostilities. What more can you tell us about that?
Hannah, there are two sides of this story. First, the TPLF leadership, the Tigray regional states leadership, who are also leading the special force and the militia, which entered into war with the National Defense Force, are saying that war is not over yet. There are battles going on, especially around the capital city of Mekelle and its environs as well. Their spokesperson, Getachew Reda, has also been, on the other hand, heard saying that they call on the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, to sit down in a way that so that things can be de-escalated and cessation of hostilities can be achieved. So there seems to be a call for peace from their side and a call for the Prime Minister to sit down and resolve situations. From the government side, Hannah, unfortunately, we haven't heard anything so far, and their stance remains to be the same, that they need to control the areas, which they have done already, and bring those people behind this conflict into justice. That's when they are willing to talk. So far, there's no change of mind and heart from the government side, but TPLF leadership is repeatedly calling for cessation of hostilities and call for conversation as well.
Thank you so much for that, Giram. Giram Chala joining us live from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Well, a sprawling country of some 19 million people in neighboring 7 states in West Africa, Mali has been engulfed in conflict since 2012. The military's ouster of President Amadou Toumani in August 2020 heightened political uncertainty amid severe security, governance, and humanitarian challenges. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy brings us a backgrounder on the Mali crisis.
The current crisis in Mali has its roots in the events of 2012, when northern separatists and Islamist armed groups forced government forces out of northern Mali and the military overthrew the government. Fresh elections in 2013 and a peace accord in 2015 between the government and 2 northern armed movements brought hope of stability. But progress in implementing the peace agreement has been patchy. Disputes over the results of legislative elections held in April 2020 and growing frustration with the presidency of Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta resulted in opposition rallies and his removal from power. Long-standing regional tensions between herd and farmer communities have become deadly, with retaliatory attacks resulting in massacres of civilians and the destruction of villages and vital grain supplies. The United Nations estimates about 12.9 million people are affected by the crisis in Mali, with 6.8 in need of humanitarian assistance. The UN mission is one of the deadliest in the world. MINUSMA personnel are reportedly being targeted by a range of armed groups within Mali.
We have terrorists from the various terrorist groups that are operating across the Sahara and Arab Maghreb. And most of them are finding easy places in the deserts of Mali. And therefore, that is an additional problem.
Over 200 peacekeepers have been killed since the deployment began in 2013. French troops are expected to lead a new Special Forces task force to work with regional armies to counter armed groups across the Sahel. The British troops will conduct long-range reconnaissance and fill a capability gap for the UN mission. Their mandate will be for 3 years, with the first 6 months rotation led by the Light Dragons and the Royal Anglian Regiment, including Army UAV pilots operating Desert Hawk. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
For more on that, we're now joined by Michael Nwakpa. He is Director of Center for African Conflict and Development and Counterterrorism, and he is based in London. Thank you so much for joining us. What do you make of the UK's deployment of troops into Mali?
Well, we could look at this at different levels, but the most plausible one is UK's increasing concern with international security. But international security as it relates to its own national security. So at the moment, the UK's terrorism threat level is put as severe. So what that means is terrorist attack is highly likely to occur. So UK sees the increase in terrorist activities in the Sahel as one that presents a potential trouble, not to its national security. So they see Africa becoming the new frontier of terrorist activities, and they see that as presenting a situation whereby they could coordinate, plan, and launch a terrorist attack on the UK. And the UK is not, alone in this. It shares the same sentiments as, other Western countries. So again, at another level, we could see its concern with immigration. So there's been, with all of this issue happening, so you see refugee situations happening. So there's been migrants crossing from borders into the UK. So the UK is taking this approach to prevent this kind of issue. So it's broadly about its own national security, and also looking at issues of immigration, and generally also to protect its own geopolitical interests in the region.
So Michael, what this looks like is that this is a UK change of strategy in Africa and the Sahel region as a whole. How crucial is the timing, and do you think that the strategy will work?
Well, the timing is very significant, considering that the UK is leaving the EU in a couple of weeks, I suppose. So the UK, this presents an opportunity for the UK to be able to test its position as its global relevant, to be able to present itself as a global leader. Also considering the vacuum in the security, with the US, Donald Trump's administration creating a vacuum. So the UK sees itself as presenting a formidable position as a global leader. So then again, the UK has a long experience in counterterrorism. So this also presents itself as an opportunity for the UK to showcase, what it's got, the experience it has in that space. Sorry.
Thank you so much for your analysis and insight into that situation. Michael Nwako, he's Director of Center for African Conflict and Development and Counterterrorism. He's an expert based in London. Well, let's now take a short break. More news when we return.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. Let's move to West Africa, where Ghanaians will be heading to the polls on Monday ahead of the exercise. Political parties and presidential candidates have signed an agreement to uphold peace. As CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports, it is yet another chance for the country to witness a duel between two main rivals, President Nana Akufo-Addo and former President John Mahama.
Amid the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, campaigns in Ghana have been muted and laid back. However, political temperatures have been rising as the West African nation once again prepares for yet another political contest between President Nana Akufo-Addo and the man he replaced, John Dramani Mahama. Ghana is one of the few nations in the region and the continent that has earned respect and honor for managing post-election conflicts. However, this does not mean that clashes have not been reported before. It's based on this that leading candidates have committed to resolve any differences in the aftermath of the polls.
We in the NPP want a credible election
conducted in a peaceful and tranquil atmosphere. But certainly we have a track record that will make Ghanaians vote to renew our mandate, just as it was in 2016. We want this victory to be sweet and incontestable.
Apart from Akufo-Addo and Mahama, 10 other candidates are contesting for the top seat. They include 3 women. Opinion polls have put incumbent Akufo-Addo ahead of his rival by a narrow margin, and this has set the stage for what could be another contested election, hence the need for the 2 main rivals to commit to peace.
As we end our campaigns tomorrow and prepare to vote on Monday, I pledge to ensure peace and preserve the stability of our dear nation, Ghana. Elections are about counting heads and not cutting heads, and so we'll work together towards peaceful elections. I urge the security agencies, voters, and all stakeholders to ensure law and order. We expect to see all security personnel behave professionally.
In the 2012 election, Mahama narrowly defeated Akufo-Addo with 50.7% of the vote cast. However, in 2016, Akufo-Addo returned the favor by beating the then incumbent Mahama by 53.8%. Over 60,000 security personnel have been deployed to manage any pre- or post-election clashes. As local voters wait to cast their ballots, the hour ticks towards the D-Day. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Meanwhile, political campaigns in Ghana have gone a notch higher as the country prepares to head to the polls on December the 7th. President Akufo-Addo is seeking re-election and faces former President John Dramani Mahama. While Ghana is believed to be a leading example of democracy within West Africa, it still grapples with issues that affect confidence and participation in the electoral process. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rafah reports from Accra.
Political parties are ramping up their campaigns ahead of the crucial general elections. 12 candidates are contesting for the presidency. But Ghana's elections have always been a two-horse race between the New Patriotic Party and the National Democratic Congress. The incumbent, Nana Akufo-Addo of the NPP, will take on former President John Dramani Mahama of the NDC for the 3rd time.
Looking at the policies that have been implemented by the government, we are so convinced that majority of the people will once again vote for the president. Mind you, one very policy that has been successful has been the free senior high school program that has endeared the heart of many.
We are very confident that a genuine vote will have only one verdict: John Mahama back to Flagstaff House. We are very clear in our minds about that. And it's obvious that the government is very nervous.
More than 17 million people are expected to vote in this year's elections, out of which more than 2.6 million are first-time voters. Experts say the state of the economy and how the government has handled the coronavirus pandemic will be the key issues likely to decide the outcome of the election. Education is also an important issue in the minds of many voters.
The promises on education from both parties, that's it for me. Being that I think as a country, we need to be educated. When you're educated, you're well informed. When you're well informed, you make decisions based on the information you have from the things you have learned. And I also love the job opportunities that they're going to create, both parties. So I'm just going to watch the ones that are going to be more feasible, that can be well administered, then vote according to that.
What will inform my decision to either maintain or vote against will be the policies on education as a student, as well policies on job creation, because after school I need to get employed.
This year's election preparations have, however, suffered setbacks due to the pandemic. Large rallies were banned during the lockdown to prevent infections spreading.
But Ghana is forging ahead to hold the elections despite the pandemic. The Electoral Commission says it will enforce all safety measures, including strict wearing of face masks and social distancing at the polling stations.
Ghana's elections have largely been carried out in a peaceful and credible manner, but the opposition party, NDC, is this time accusing the Electoral Commission of attempts to rig the election in favor of the ruling party, NPP.
We don't trust the EC. They have not given us cause to trust them. So we are taking our own referee into the ring.
But The Electoral Commission has rejected the allegations and says it will ensure a free and fair election. Some experts say the outcome of the presidential election is difficult to predict.
We've had a pandemic which has affected the way the candidates have campaigned. So if you put these two together, it puts an already unpredictable election in further flux or in further volatility. I think that if there has been any time that there's been a lot of uncertainty about the outcome of an election, it is now.
Ghana is seen as a shining star of democracy within the West Africa sub-region, which has witnessed coups and violence during some past elections. But it also has had to deal with making the electoral process more transparent and appealing to the masses. In the 2016 elections, voter turnout was estimated at 69.2%. The Electoral Commission hopes more voters will cast their ballots on polling day. The government has made the election day December 7 a public holiday, something that's not been done in previous general elections. It's likely many people may turn up to vote this time round. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Your business news is coming up after the break. Here's what you can expect. Egypt Economic Summit reviews government's performance during pandemic. And Tunisian government to curb use of cash and digitize commercial transactions.
It's taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Time now for the business news. The second Egypt Economic Summit took place in Cairo. The conference discussed the performance of the government during the COVID-19 pandemic. Yasser Hakim reports.
The gathering of experts, officials and CEOs has been analyzing the economy and opportunities arising from the pandemic era. The investment sector was in the forefront of discussions.
We have shown the investors our vision and information about the economic and investment zones, what has been achieved so far and the plans for the future. It was important to lay our strategy here. We want to improve the investment climate, raise the quality of infrastructure and readiness to receive businesses, and provide more incentives for investors.
Foreign investments saw an 11% increase year-on-year. Yet it's still short of the targets set by the government due to the fallout from the COVID-19. Apart from the investment and financial sectors, there's been extensive discussions on the telecom sector and the real estate and how they were affected by the coronavirus in 2020. The government's financial support has pushed these industries forward, which helped sustain the economy during tough times.
We supported the ailing sectors through easing financial constraints and providing funds, loans and grants, especially to the tourism, hospitality, travel and services sectors, as well as small and medium enterprises. Meanwhile, there were sectors that managed to adapt to the crisis and slowly rebound. There are agriculture, telecom and IT sectors, the medical sector and construction.
Experts also highlighted the North African countries' economic plans post-COVID-19 pandemic.
The
government will continue its infrastructure projects and the mega projects such as building new cities and the new administrative capital. This will reduce unemployment rates further. Government will also continue to support the private sector and alleviate any hurdles so that they can invest more in the future.
The economic summit has commended the positive impact of the country's financial and economic policies amidst the recession-hit period. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Authorities in Tunisia are seeking to boost e-commerce and reduce the use of cash. That economy is seeking to have over 300,000 retailers join the electronic payment system. The value of e-commerce transactions in Tunisia rose to $80 million last year. From Tunis, here's CGTN's Adnan Shiwashi with more.
Tunisian Ministry of Commerce officials have said they are embarking on plans to digitize commercial transactions and limit the use of cash. The e-commerce department says the ministry recorded 5.3 million transactions in the first 9 months of 2020. This number increased by 87% compared to the same period in 2019. The value of e-commerce transactions for both administrative services and goods reached 270 million dinars, which is around $100 million.
There's a new dynamic in the e-commerce sector since the pandemic and the health confinement. There are also too many offers on the websites and social networks. Cash on delivery is still widespread, but we aim to decash up to 90% of these operations. The state is boosting digitization and e-payment, so we are also offering the export facilitation platform Easy Export to promote exports by SMEs.
The African e-commerce giant Jumia is the leading mainstream e-commerce player in Tunisia. The company has offered new services since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in a bid to facilitate transactions and to decash payment operations.
The e-commerce in Tunisia and in Africa in general has a lot of challenges also, mainly the logistics challenge and the payment challenge. The payment challenge mainly because our economy is still very cash driven. So basically in Jumia we have a big percentage of our payment going through cash. But fortunately we launched Jumia Pay in March 2020 and we have more and more customers paying with credit cards and with electronic payment methods.
In the month of November, over 10 million people visited Jumia website to take advantage of the exceptional offers during the 3 weeks of Black Fridays. Recent statistics show that the company's customers live in all regions across the country.
Jumia Tunisia is now working since more than 5 years. We grew our number of employees to serve our customers from few people to nearly 200 people. And our customers on the other side are coming from all backgrounds. Most of them are young, but you have also family, a lot of households. People are purchasing products from a different range of categories, from electronics to groceries.
According to the Minister of Commerce, Tunisia aims to boost exports by offering incentives to thousands of exporting companies and businesses. The government will also support the retailers and private sector operators that will invest in e-commerce and offer electronic payment services. Experts assert that the growth of e-commerce in Tunisia will significantly depend on the quality and efficiency of logistics networks. Authorities in Tunis, as well as private e-tailers like Jumia, seek to boost e-commerce and to curb the use of cash. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Many companies dealing with fast-moving consumer goods in Nigeria lose millions of dollars every year due to their poor logistics and distribution networks. This gap between manufacturers and retailers poses a major challenge to players in the country's informal retail sector. But one startup in the country is using technology to solve the problem. Here's Deji Badmos with that story.
Using technology to solve a common problem and making money in the process. That's literally what Trade Depot, a B2B e-commerce platform, is doing. Informal stores or shops like this one account for most of the retail sales in Nigeria. But there's one problem: getting their supplies from manufacturers. That's exactly where Trade Depot comes in, serving as a bridge between manufacturers and retailers using technology.
It starts with building relationships with these various suppliers and aggregating their inventory in our warehouses, right? So that we have this inventory from the different consumer goods manufacturers available, right? And then we build digital platforms for these retailers to then use and make requests for the products they want. You can simply just identify the items you want and place a request on an app by calling a toll-free line, by chatting over WhatsApp, whatever. And then our job is to identify these items you want and get them across to you by the next day.
After taking orders from the small retailers, Trade Depot then does the delivery from this warehouse using its special delivery agents. In the case of Lagos, the delivery agents drive around the city on a daily basis, delivering supplies to retailers. The startup handles distribution for some of the biggest FMCG companies in the country and distributes to a network of over 40,000 micro-retailers who can place orders through the firm's different platforms and get their supplies.
We are in about 48,000 stores in total that we service. Our focus is to make sure that if you make a request to us, we promise you that maximum within 24 hours you get those items delivered.
It may sound simple, but it's a lot of hard work for Ezukane and his team, who only started out 4 years ago. And beyond just distribution, Trade Depot also supports retailers on its platform with credit in the form of small loans.
A lot of these folks normally have no way of getting access to credit, not because they wouldn't be credit worthy, but because the structures that exist do not support access to credit for people like this, because there is no data by which you can score them, by which you can decide who gets credit or not, right? But by giving them a platform like this that allows them to build transaction histories, we now have a basis to do the scoring, right? And so based on this scoring, we can identify that actually this person qualifies for credit, and then we extend credit to them. Interestingly, we find that over 80% of the people that we give credit, this is the first time in their lives they are getting credit from any source.
While a number of startups have been pushed out of business due to the harsh effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, Trade Depot has found a way to beat the virus by launching a digital distribution channel during the nationwide lockdown.
When the lockdown resulted in the traditional distribution channels not being available or being very limited, it significantly increased the urgency for everyone, both the retailers and the manufacturers, to adopt more digital channels.
Since it launched in 2016, the startup has raised around $13 million to scale its operations. The business is growing, and Ezukane and his team have their eyes set beyond the borders of Nigeria. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
A trade agreement between the EU and the UK failed to materialize on Friday after a week of talks in London. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will talk directly. In a joint statement Friday, the chief UK negotiator and his EU counterpart said it was necessary to pause the talks as significant divergences remained between the two sides. On Saturday, Johnson and von der Leyen will instead try to break the impasse that's dragged on for months. But time is running out. Britain is due to leave the EU single market on December the 31st with or without a trade agreement. Well, time running out for Brexit trade talks. The UK government is scrambling to create alternatives to 40 years of free trade. The measures include building dozens of lorry parks to avoid bureaucratic chaos at ports, as Richard Bestick reports from Kent, near the southern coastal port of Dover. Planning regulations have been swept aside.
They're working round the clock here, paving the so-called Garden of England to put up a parking lot, tearing out topsoil for tarmac in a race against the clock.
Britain will become what they call a third country, so we will need customs checks at the ports, which currently aren't in place. So there will need to be facilities for lorry drivers to be able to complete relevant customs checks.
These lorry parks constructed under emergency government powers, leaving the neighbouring village of Merstham with little say in Britain's new borders with Europe.
It is perhaps an irony that most of the people around here voted for Brexit. Perhaps not realising it would mean a massive lorry park on their doorstep.
Villagers stoic in the face of Brexit reality.
I don't think anyone who voted for Brexit actually knew the details of what they were voting for. And even with a month to go, we still don't know what use the customs site is going to be put to.
A medieval church now appears out of place. Across the county, they'll be holding sites for up to 7,000 trucks, according to the government's own worst-case scenario. Across the country, many more. Required whether or not a new trade deal is agreed, as drivers cope with reams of red tape in a post-Brexit world. An army of 50,000 customs officials being hired and trained. According to the British Ports Association, government should have been quicker off the mark.
The design of this process has been one-sided, to say the least. Effectively, what you would normally expect is some kind of outcome to be set in stone. The fact that we still haven't got a deal is quite amazing when you consider how long we've had to talk about this.
Dover is one of Britain's busiest ports, handling 10,000 trucks a day. This image of free trade in motion about to change radically. Richard Bestick, CGTN, Dover, England.
Your sport news is coming up after the break. Here's a highlight. Late Senegal World Cup hero Papa Diop awarded highest honor by President Macky Sall.